you have completed hours of expert witness training and have testified in federal context. What patterns do you see in organizations once they reach the point of litigation?
I think that many employers do not understand that research now shows us that there are direct associations between workplace abuse, psychological, psychosocial stressors, and physiological injury that can be documented in blood tests, in MRI scans, as I mentioned. I think many employers are not aware of stress-induced analgesia. That's the concept I was mentioning before, when the body and the brain keep a person from conscious awareness of their injury until they're into a safer environment. I speak to so many workplace abuse survivors who say, oh, I knew I was under stress. I was having a hard time sleeping. I was having ruminating thoughts. Even when it was the evening or the weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about that one meeting. My family and friends asked me to stop talking about that bad boss, just keep your head up and, push through. It's a good job. You've got good benefits. Why would you, jeopardize that? When the person ends up going finally on family medical leave, for example, because of the stress to their body, or they leave a job under constructive discharge, which in the United States is illegal. That means that a person was made so uncomfortable in their job that they had to quit to save their sanity or their health, or the person was terminated from their position. After that moment, that separation moment, so many people start to realize that their body is falling apart. And I think to the point of your question, many employers do not realize when they force a person out of the company, that person can turn around and go into their doctor and get those blood tests. They can check their sugar levels. They can check their cholesterol. They can check to see whether or not they've grown a significant weight around their midsection. We refer to this as the stress belly. We can see these things and we can chart them in relation to adverse experiences at work. And when we are able to effectively communicate that to a jury of our peers, it starts to become very clear because we have decades of research that shows that there is, in fact, a relationship between psychological stress and trauma and physiological wounding.
That is a very important information, Elena, as a person who have witnessed so many relatable things. For example, a man in mid-40s, a very senior level employee, he told me it's not worth it because it's impacting my relationship with my wife. I am going through anxiety and depression. I am taking medication. I have seen him as a mature, balanced employee who is very capable. But what I understood, he has been dealing with this for a couple of years and he tried his maximum. He requested for help from different managers, different ways. But we know the system in United States, knowingly or unknowingly, they don't truly protect employees. They might have wonderful policies, but that will stay just in the papers, not in actions. That's an unfortunate truth that many people don't want to admit. But, people who went through the experiences know that is the truth. So he sought for support. Nothing happened. Nothing changed. It only escalated. At that point, he had no option. So he gave up. And I told him, why don't you just stand up and raise your voice? They tried to silence your voice, but your voice is your freedom, your right, and use that. But he told me, I am at a point that I have to prioritize my peace. And coming back to the point of how do we prove the adverse actions, sometimes, what litigation reveals is the type of harm that rarely happens overnight, right? It's an experience that an employee have been going through years, months, maybe long time. And sometimes people don't want to speak up because the culture itself is silencing them, right? So they feel like, okay, let me be silent. That is safer because, the benefit is good, the salary is good. So it accumulates in the space of a lot of blind spots as well, a specific repeatable leadership gap that organizations keep inheriting from one another without ever questioning its origin. For example, structural issues like certain people doesn't understand how to manage diverse talents. And if you as a manager is unable to understand their perspective, then you are unable to evaluate or assess their performance or their perspective or their purpose. So it has multiple aspects. There are different leadership blind spots that will impact employees very negatively. So based on your research, what is some of the leadership blind spot that causes the most harm, and is it easy to fix from your perspective?
So I just first want to acknowledge the harm that you mentioned this colleague has experienced. That is so common that really bright, ethical subject matter experts who have long careers as leaders, who have made a major impact in a company, is exactly the employee who ends up being targeted by bullying and mobbing. The research out of Workplace Bullying Institute, Dr. Gary Namey and his wife, Dr. Ruth Namey, they do a survey, a nationally representative survey of the workforce. And what they have repeatedly found is that there are patterns in who is targeted by workplace abuse and who engages in workplace abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you described of your colleague absolutely resonates with that research. As I mentioned, people with subject matter expertise, people who have integrity, who are just hard workers trying to do their job, stay out of the office politics, or perhaps they're following the law. They are reporting if things are being unethical or illegal in practice. And oftentimes the people who target them are what they refer to as imposter leaders, people who were promoted up in an organization without the necessary subject matter expertise, without the training in managing interactions. And they find that that natural star that we just mentioned as an existential threat to themselves. And so then we see what's referred to as tall poppy syndrome. That is, if you imagine walking out into a field of poppies, every once in a while, there'll be a poppy that's a little bit taller than the others. And that's the poppy that ends up being cut down. It is the most contorted compliment that a person can receive in corporate America because they've done everything right. They've hit the metrics. They've brought in the big clients. They have, been able to create oftentimes a team that is internally a place where there is psychological safety, where people are encouraged to think big and take the chance of sharing a half-baked idea. And importantly, a culture where it's safe enough to make a mistake. But if in that individual team is within a larger organization that has a toxic culture, the leader of that individual, healthier, more psychologically safe team is going to become a target of the imposter leaders who are at a higher level who feel threatened. Because if that individual team, if the word gets out that that individual team is working so well, that the secret behind their high performance, for example, is that they have a leader who is humble, able to take critical feedback, and leads a team with hope and inspiration rather than a heavy, iron fist, then it will be a reflection back on the larger organization that there's a different way that they can and should be leading.
Sure.
So this is completely backed up by the research that we have these patterns of who ends up getting targeted and who tends to target others. Unfortunately, there's also a fair amount of research that shows that in corporate America, the higher up you look in an organizational chart, the more likely you are to find people who fit within what's referred to as the dark triad. These are people with narcissism, Machiavellianism, and sociopathy. These are people who ascend by kissing up and punching down. They are extremely dangerous people to be around because they oftentimes do have an ability to interpret the emotional reactions of other people, but rather than engaging that knowledge from a place of empathy, they weaponize it against the person that they are working with. And so my suggestions to leaders always are one, I would start by saying, learn about psychological safety, how it is that we can create workplaces where our best and our brightest can flourish. But we have to protect them because there will always be people around them, whether they are lateral or above them, or even their direct reports, who can feel threatened by that person's natural success, and it might be a success in terms of their productivity at work. It might be a success in their ability to engage others. It could be clients. It could be colleagues. those are the people who might end up drawing the ire of imposter leaders. And so we want our managers and our HR to know, one, about psychological safety, and two, how to have the courage. Dr. Jennifer Freyd up in University of Oregon writes about institutional courage. It is scary for a manager to be the one person in a larger organization who has the courage to say, this is not right and we have to change it. We have to do the hard work here. But there is information that can help people do that. The second piece that I would suggest with managers is to be really clear about the warning signs that a mob is forming. Mm-hmm. So these tend to be things like using unofficial channels of communication, like gossip. Mm-hmm. People who are suddenly promoting a narrative about an employee that is vastly different than what you know their history has been. So that high-performing employee is suddenly being referred to as problematic in some way. And you're hearing that false narrative repeated by multiple people. The more that the brain hears the same thing repeated, the more likely that it will start to believe it, even if there isn't other evidence other than it's the same narrative being repeated. And I would again refer back to Dr. Jennifer Fraser's work of the gaslit brain, where she talks about the psychological manipulation tactics, like people who will repeat a lie. It's the repetition that is oftentimes a tell, a signifier that one might want to go, there's something happening here.